Remember that conspiracy theory that the WHO would be able to close borders and enforce vaccine passports? It's actually going to happen. So is it worth knowing who funds the WHO? I'd say so. Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. Together we will awaken. Together we will return to an original state where we will be able to discern truth from fiction, where we will be able to engage in discourse. Turn on the notification bell right now and subscribe to our channel. The algorithm, of course, wants you dumb and distracted, filled with mind-numbing mainstream media mush, but we want you vivacious and awake. That's why we're talking today about the WHO's new proposal that they have the ability to impose on your country, wherever you are in the world, because it's the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization wants to be able to impose certain restrictions. So how did the World Health Organization even get their money and their legitimacy? I don't remember voting for them. I don't remember being asked if I wanted a World Health Organization. Well, apparently we've got one. Oh, that's all very lovely for you. So who funds them? What are their intentions? I mean, presumably part of it is really helping people and providing medicines. But one way of working out what the intention of an organization is looking at where they get their money from, under the assumption that people won't give them money if that organization is not going to be advantageous to the economic ends preferred by the donor. That's a fair assumption, right? Let me know in the chat and the comments. So firstly, we'll talk about the WHO and where they get their money. Then we'll talk about the legitimacy of this new proposal that they're able to impose on your country, and therefore you, regulations that you didn't vote for. Let's have a listen to Margaret Chan, former director of the WHO, explaining how it's funded.
You asked an excellent question. If I tell you, WHO as an organization, only 30% of my budget is predictable funds.
I mean, how far into this video are we going to get without saying, it's Bill Gates? In the end, Bill Gates is going to turn up, isn't he, with some money? But let's let Margaret Chan have her moment.
Other 70% I have to take ahead and go around the world to beg for money.
Dignified, a hat, begging around the world. Anyone got a few quid? Anyone got a few dollars? Anyone got an agenda?
And when they give us the money, they are highly linked to their preferences.
Okay, here's some money. And I've also got some preferences. That's how we've always understood the relationships between organizations like the WHO, various national governments, and the corporate world to be. That money is funneled in, expectations are funneled out, right? Let me know in the chat. So, who's top of the list of donors? Germany. Who's second? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation alone is responsible for 88% of the total amount donated by philanthropic foundations to the WHO. Over the years, the billionaire philanthropists, are we still calling them billionaire philanthropists? I mean, like, aren't philanthropists? They're just doing stuff because of their love of mankind or humankind, right? Over the years, the billionaire philanthropists have become the WHO's second biggest donor, making the health agency heavily dependent on their support to keep functioning. As Margaret Chan said, they have to go round with their hat out, and these people have preferences. I wonder what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's preference is. Global health experts say that while this money is welcome, it gives the Gates an outsized influence and underscores the chronic funding problem the WHO faces, even as it contends with more and more health crises. Over 8% of the WHO's funding relies on voluntary contributions, meaning any amount of money given freely by donors, whether member states, NGOs, philanthropic organizations, or other private entities. The voluntary contributions are typically earmarked for specific projects or diseases, meaning the WHO cannot freely decide how to use them. I mean, that means their whole legitimacy, or at least 80% of the legitimacy of the organisation, is up for question. 80% of their funding comes from people or organisations, as it just listed, that say, you can have this money if you agree to ... And we can all fill that in depending on how much we've educated ourselves of the events of the last couple of years, the involvement of the pharmaceutical industry in various health crises, not just the obvious one of the last few years, but the continent of Africa has had all sorts of peculiar stuff inflicted upon it, as well as the nation of India. This is an ongoing problem that merely became concentrated and some would say more visible and perhaps even relevant during the pandemic because it affected everybody in ways that became observable, if not relayable. The WHO has had to do the bidding of rich donors, not only rich nations in Europe and North America, but also rich philanthropies such as the Gates Foundation, said global health expert Lawrence Gostin. Kelly Lee, a professor of public health at Simon Fraser University who authored a book about the WHO, said the sheer size of the funds from the Gates Foundation compromises the WHO's independence. independence. Whether it's political parties being funded by the donations of corporations and billionaires, or the WHO being funded by billionaires and corporations and philanthropic organisations that many people say are about tax breaks actually and influence and power, shows you that these organisations have such particular relationships with powerful economic entities that democracy itself becomes irrelevant. For example, have you been offered the opportunity to vote on whether or not your country follows the edicts of the WHO? If you use this platform, YouTube, did you know that YouTube and Google accept the WHO's regulations and recommendations when it comes to things that can be said on this platform? That's not no power at all. That's the power of censorship, influence. It transcends. Who has more power? Google and the WHO, or you and your vote? Which one of these? Basically the same individuals shall I... Google! He who pays the piper plays the tune, as the old saying goes, she said. Nice. There are important questions to be raised about good governance, including the accountability, representativeness and legitimacy of having a single foundation be so influential. The current system is frankly undemocratic. And yet democracy is the word that people continually use when reifying our civilizations, particularly in contrast with some of the civilizations that we should be bombing or attacking or otherwise destabilizing and usurping and replacing. So let's have a look at the WHO's current agenda to impose a treaty that would mean that you would have no control over whether your borders were locked down and certain medications might be made mandatory or the carrying of passports. This is from a British newspaper. Lockdown measures could be imposed on the UK by the World Health Organization during a future pandemic under sweeping new powers. Member states would be obliged to follow the agency's instructions when responding to pandemics, including by introducing vaccine passports, border closures and quarantine measures under a draft update to its regulations. Now, we have to go around the world as well with our hand out begging for money from all sorts of people. Mostly, though, they're pretty legit. And this one is going to be fun and enjoyable. Stay to the end. I'll make it funny. I'll put little jokes in there. Stay with us. Stay with us for this little ad. See you in a moment. Harvard Health Review researched why people take supplements. The top response was hope. They hope, these poor bastards. Vitamin and mineral supplements will help overcome a lifetime of poor diet and exercise, and they hope they might offset family health issues. There is little evidence that the vitamin and mineral supplements we take are anything more than placebo. From 22 clinical trials comparing multivitamins to placebo, the health of the multivitamin group was no better than the placebo group. 5 servings of fruit and 5 servings of vegetables per day is linked to lower mortality, lower cases of cancer, reduced risk of high blood pressure, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, and respiratory disease. Field of Greens provides a full spectrum of the essential vegetables and fruits our bodies need for proper nutrition. Field of Greens is an organic superfood. It's the whole fruit and the whole vegetable, all in there, every little bit of it. Field of Greens is the only fruits and vegetable brand backed by a better health promise. Field of Greens promises you'll feel healthier fast. But the greater proof comes during your next physical, when your doctor checks your lab results and goes, "Hey, baby, I don't know what you're doing, but keep it up. Let me get you started with 15% off your first order, plus free fast shipping. Visit brickhouserussell.com and use promo code BRAND. That's brickhouserussell.com, promo code BRAND. A new pandemic treaty under discussion would also force Britain to spend 5% of its health budget on preparing for another virus outbreak. I wonder if you fund something, whether it's more or less likely to happen. Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. Some ministers are understood to be alarmed by plans to increase the WHO's powers, enabling its governing body to require countries to hand over the recipe of vaccines regardless of intellectual property rights and to counter misinformation. Do you notice that increasingly we are being invited to not trust one another, to loathe one another, to engage continually in conflagration, to believe that people are sort of stupid and ugly and untrustworthy, and that there is a cadre of experts, a technocratic level of government that we should all be yielding to? If you believe in yourself, your ability to run your own life, to run your own community, to make your own decisions, why would you participate in the funding of an organisation that clearly has strong relationships with corporate interests that require a profit that they can get by imposing certain regulations? Why would we even participate in systems like that? Let me know in the chat and the comments. And notice that there's a dimension to this that's about social dynamics, about spirituality, about personal awakening, about the necessity to have a population that is ridden with fear and doubt and alert to conflict and totally mistrustful of other people. If you felt that you could trust yourself, if you felt that you could trust other people, if you felt that you could run your own life in your own community, why would you need these organisations? And of course, I know that WHO have participated in, I imagine, all sorts of beneficial beneficial programs that have alleviated all sorts of tensions. And in fact, if you're going to have a global body, it should be funded very responsibly and it should be democratic. These are just the sort of things that people say, aren't they? I'm suggesting that we do them. MPs have written to ministers to warn of an ambition evident for the WHO to transition from an advisory organisation to a controlling international authority. That's very interesting. That many bureaucratic organisations, on the basis of their expertise, are moving into positions of domination where they're able to bypass democracy. The WHO, though, is not from God or the sea or nature or a philosopher. It is funded, as we just saw Margaret Chan say, by corporate entities. They go with their hand out and they say to them, what do you want us to do? That is a bad model. Would you agree? Don't you want to decide for yourself? Have you been watching what's going on? Have you noticed the undue influence of these global corporations? Have you noticed the ineptitude of your government? Have you noticed that these two entities are ideologically interlocked? Have you seen that? Let me know in the chat. In their letter, seen by the Telegraph, they urge the Foreign Office to block powers that appear to intrude materially into the UK's ability to make its own rules and control its own budgets. You can see why there's a rise in nationalism when things like this are happening. That nationalism, to some degree, is a response to feeling invaded. My personal beliefs is that these decisions should have nothing to do with racial, religious, gender or sexual identity, but the idea that power is elsewhere and being imposed on you should be rejected by every independent-minded, community-oriented individual on our planet. The rule changes have been proposed as part of plans to update the WHO's international health regulations in light of the coronavirus pandemic and establish a new pandemic preparedness treaty. One of the things that troubled me most about the pandemic period was the lack of communication, transparency, the surveillance, the censorship, the opportunism, and the ineptitude of many of the bodies, organisations, and individuals that are in positions of power. How do you feel about granting more power to those interests? Let me know. The treaty was first proposed by world leaders, including Boris Johnson in 2021, during the pandemic, and was originally designed to improve alert systems, data sharing, and the production of vaccines to foster an all-of-government and all-of-society approach. Yeah, that sounds terrifying, and the people involved are people like Boris Johnson, which is the last thing any of us want. Even Boris Johnson doesn't trust Boris Johnson. But among 300 proposed amendments to the IHRS are changes to make the WHO's advice binding. You can't have binding advice. Hey, I got some advice for you. You know, maybe you should look out for someone who's more suitable for you. Oh, yeah, I might do. I don't know. It depends how I feel. That's binding! Oh, okay. Advice shouldn't be binding. Okay, we're just thinking of rounding up this demographic and this demographic based on our personal preferences. Oh, no, that doesn't seem fair. We think everyone should be able to get along and make our own choices. Binding! And introduce new requirements for countries to recognise it as the global authority on public health measures. Sounds like an egomaniac. I'd like you to recognise me as a global authority on public health measures. Well, we'll base that on your effectiveness, actually, and also how you fund it. Shut up! To mind your own business! I got some advice for you! You better fuck off! Well, I think I'm going to stay binding! The plan would require member countries to recognise the WHO as the guidance and coordinating authority of international public health response and undertake to follow the WHO's recommendations in their international public health response. If passed, the change would mean the WHO could enforce border closures, quarantine measures, and vaccine passports on all member countries, including the UK. So that means they've got the right to lock you up in your house. Let me just have a look. Before we sign this treaty, what does it entitle you to do? Oh, nothing really, just to close your borders. What, so no one can come in or out? And also quarantine measures, so we'd have to stay in our house. And vaccine passports, so everyone would have to. Listen, let me give you some advice. Just do what we fucking say. Well, actually, binding! They're using bureaucracy in health and safety to legitimise new forms of tyranny that are presenting themselves as all kind of friendly and here to help. And if you attack them, they say you're a conspiracy theorist or have got some atavistic, throwback, nationalistic ideology that don't belong in today's modern world. But actually, this is the tyranny now. Always the conversations about despots and despotism use the semiotics and image systems of the most recent examples of tyranny and despotism. But it won't be like that, plainly. In a more technologically advanced version of events, in a more media-savvy, data-oriented tyranny, everything will be like a kind of soft sell. That's what I'm starting to realise. They'll be just, oh, hi, do you want some help with your... Yeah, we've just got to do that. And before you know it, you're locked in your house with a passport and unable to go anywhere. Well, that is despotism. Yeah, but we're doing it for a reason. Despots always do what they do for a reason. A draft of of the treaty itself would commit member states to spending 5% of their health budgets plus a proportion of GDP to pandemic preparedness. That's your money. Esther McVey, the former cabinet minister, said, there is rightly growing concern about the WHO's pandemic treaty and international health regulations. The plans represent a significant shift for the organisation from a member-led advisory body to a health authority with powers of compulsion. I don't like seeing power and compulsion that close together in a sentence. You can't go from a, hey, we're member-led, here's some advice, to compelling power. That is like in Star Wars where they're crushed in that thing. That is a compelling power. You're going to be crushed. You don't have any choice. Once advice becomes binding, you're in an interesting territory. I would say, and I would advise you, this isn't binding, to resist that. You can do that if you want to, because it's just advice. Hopefully, though, the WHO have a good track record and that this mad, egotistical, narcissistic demand for authority is based on experience. It's like LeBron James saying, I'll be in charge of basketball because I'm the best at it. Something like that. Let's have a look. This is particularly worrying when you consider the WHO's poor track record on providing consistent, clear and scientifically sound advice for managing international disease outbreaks. That's like me taking control of basketball. They've got a bad track record. Consistent, clear and scientifically sound. That is totally what I want. That is the bare minimum for an organisation calling itself the World Health Organization, isn't it? Campaigners also expressed concerns about increasing the WHO's role in identifying misinformation after its experts dismissed the lab leak COVID origin theory only to later accept it remains on the table. Yes, it does remain on the table because it's not been wiped down properly, like the Wuhan lab itself. Molly Kingsley, co-founder of the Us For Them campaign group, said, we should all be concerned about the WHO being ordained as an arbiter of pandemic truth, especially given its poor record during the pandemic, such as its claim that COVID was definitely zoonotic in origin and its April 2020 denial of the role of natural immunity in protecting against infection. I wonder if what Margaret Chan said about the way that it's funded and those two errors have any kind of relationship with one another. Who could ever possibly work that out? Not you or me. We're just stupid people that need unelected, corporate-funded bodies to tell us what to do. And thank God you're going to have no choice, because what would you do with your choice? You just mess it up. You're not intelligent enough to make choices for yourself. You're not part of the limitless oneness that underwrites all reality. You're not capable of remetabolizing yourself into glory. You're not capable of putting your past behind you and moving forward into a glorious new future based on love, pragmatism, rationalism, democracy, sharing, overcoming former prejudices and errors in order to create a better new world based on the technological advances and spiritual awakening that we are currently undergoing. You are! All of that was just rhetoric. You can do it. I believe in you and I do not trust them. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments and the chat. And if you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. They're just as good, probably. I can't remember what that one is. That one's good. I don't know about that one. They're both good. They're all good. And you can see us every day on Rumble, uncensored, where we can bring people together in the spirit of harmony and love. More important than any of that is that you please stay free.